Thank you, Dr. Grandin, for joining us tonight. Wanted to start out with something really basic because I think a lot of the folks in the audience will understand what autism and Asperger's is, but some viewers won't. And if you could tell us what they mean to you.
Well, I had no speech until I was 4 years old. Well, I would have been diagnosed because when I was 3, I had no language, tantrums, rocking. Obviously something was drastically wrong with me. But the more Asperger type of kid, and they've taken the Asperger's out and put it all together, is a kid with no speech delay. But in the 50s, what we used to call geeks and nerds, socially awkward. And I have friends I went to college with that'd be diagnosed with autism today that own businesses. And I think one of the big problems is social rules and manners and things like that are not taught in the same rigid way, structured way as they were taught in the 50s. So if a kid's got a few social circuits not hooked up, he's not going to learn it by instinct.
When you were young, did you have a problem with eye contact or something?
Well, I wasn't very good at that, but when I was 8 years old, my mother would have a dinner party, and my sister and I had to greet all the guests. We had to shake hands with them, and there was no calling them by their first name. We knew their first names, but we weren't allowed to use them. It was, "Good evening, Mrs. Wood. Good evening, Mr. Wood. I'll take your coat." These were things that kids did in the 50s, and it taught social skills.
Sounds like you had a really special mother.
Mother had a really good sense of just how hard to kind of push me. Also, fortunately, she got some very good advice very early on. The first doctor I went to when I was 2.5 was a neurologist who recommended a little speech therapy school that 2 teachers did in their basement, and they did the same kind of ABA type of things that are done now.
Wow, they were really progressive.
Well, Miss Reynolds invented ABA, but it had to wait a long time before it got reinvented.
Currently, they are all categorized in one spectrum.
As of 2013, the American Psychiatric Association decided to blob it all together in one big gigantic continuum, which I think is really bad from the standpoint of teachers and service providers. Then you got the big bullying problem. Well, the only places I was not bullied was special interests, which was horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Get these kids in specialized interest things, the school play, band, robotics classes. There's great things called maker groups. There's this fabulous magazine called Maker, where you make all kinds of cool stuff. 4-H FFA, showing animals. Okay, showing chickens, that's a great project for the elementary school kids. Something they can do with other children. But I'm seeing too many of these kids kind of get overprotected. They're not learning things like shopping, how to shake hands. You've got to just demonstrate to them how to do it.
Tell me about sensory dysfunction.
Sensory problems vary from being a mild nuisance to being very debilitated. Can you imagine if everything you heard was just super loud to where it hurts your ears? Or maybe your hearing cuts in and out like a bad cell phone, like a really bad cell phone connection. You'd have a hard time learning how to talk too. There are also some individuals where fluorescent lights cause the room to flicker. When they go to read, they see the print jiggling on the page. Maybe the visual image is breaking up like a bad satellite dish shaking, and the image pixelates because there's something wrong back here. Sensory problems are real. They also are highly variable. You can have with autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, all kinds of learning problems, ADHD.
I think I read that you don't like the stitching in clothing. That can be uncomfortable.
Well, I find some cottons itch. Like I used to buy pants from Old Navy and they were nice and soft, and then they must have switched their vendors in China, and now those pants itch and I hate them. Even though they're all 100% cotton. There's something different in the weave, even though I washed them first, they itch. And it's pretty hard if your clothes itch all the time. Sensory issues are real. Now, there are some ways to desensitize some of the noise sensitivity by letting the kid control it. All right, let's say it's microphone feedback, that screeching sound that microphones make. So the kid sees a microphone, he's running from the room because he's afraid it might screech. Well, give him a handheld mic and let him walk up to the speaker and it goes, "Argh!" and then he can back off.
He can realize he can
controls it. And if he controls it, they may be able to be desensitized. There's abnormalities in the sensory system. Also, there's abnormal activation of the amygdala, the fear center in the brain. And so some of these kids get massive fear responses from certain sensory input. Well, some people like me are visual thinkers, very good at drawing. You know, that showed up around 3rd or 4th grade. Another kid, it might be very good at math. Well, then let's let them do the more advanced math. They tend to have uneven skills. Build on the strength. We need to be getting a lot more into, well, what are they going to do when they grow up? The work that I did with livestock is a whole field called industrial design. You see, in all of making things, there's like 2 sides of it. There's the art side, that's the industrial design. Think on your iPhone, the interface on your iPhone, that was done by an artist. Steve Jobs was an artist. Then the engineers have to make the inside of that phone work. See, that's different kinds of minds working together. And I talk about that extensively in my book, The Autistic Brain. Actually, I wish that book had been titled just Different Kinds of Minds, because people get too hung up on what the diagnosis is. You know, geeks and nerds is another diagnosis for very mild autism. And half of Silicon Valley's got it, but they avoid the labels.
If you could draw a plan of what would be the best scenario for diagnoses, how would
All
it
I'm going to say
show?
is, you got a kid that's 3 years old and not talking. The worst thing you can do is nothing. I don't really care what his diagnosis is. You got a 3-year-old that's not talking. He needs 20 hours a week of one-on-one teaching. Now, everyone's going to fight over which method you use. But the thing I have found is the good teachers kind of have a knack of how to be kind of gently insistent. You got to teach these kids how to take turns. That was taught to me with board games. You've got to learn the turn taking. You got to work with them. I don't really care what the diagnosis is. 3 years old, not talking, and a lot of weird behavior to go along with it. You need to start doing something right now. Don't wait for services. Get some volunteers. My Way I See It book's a really good book to read. Also, there's a book called Autism Breakthrough. That's by the Sunrise Method. You know, grandmothers could read that and do it. But you got to start working with that kid, and you got to start working with him now. Don't wait.